I think in this day and age where anyone can put out a game, see Exhibit A, there's a million mediocre games out there, and do you really want a mediocre game experience? No, none of us want a mediocre game experience. So let's try to make a really good experience, even if it's for a narrower market. Let's pick a market and make a really great experience for that. And especially for an indie game, we're not spending $500 million to make a game.
We're in this community called PBBG with persistent browser-based games. I told you today, most of us are lazy devs who don't want to learn to put a game on Steam, so we just do it in the browser. But you actually are learning web development to make this game. And how did you overcome the resistance to make that decision?
Well, it's just about persistence, right? Because if you want something, you've either got to be able to do it yourself, or of course, if you can hire it out, or get someone else to do it, partner, whatever, that always works. But it's one of those things. I want to make this game, and in order to make this game, it's going to require coding. And I do like coding. I have a love-hate relationship with it. It's frustrating when you don't even know how something works and you're randomly trying things, with help from the internet until it works. But once putting together the structure to me is like a puzzle, right? You've got these pieces and you want a certain thing to happen, and you put all those puzzle pieces together, and then it works. So that's just it. It's I'm just super persistent about, like, this is the thing I want, and these are the things I need to do to get what I want. And so is it worth it? And that's part of the evaluation process as well. Am I willing to do those things that it's going to take to get there? And if you look at that realistically and go, I'm not willing to do that, then that's not a project worth starting. And if you think it is worth it, well, then you find out once you start. You may discover it wasn't as worth it as you thought it was, which I have not with coding. And then that's what you remind yourself of. And I think it's also important. Do you really want it? The end result, because a lot of people get confused about that. I think, it's like, I want this thing, and you don't really want it that bad. And so when it gets hard, it's like, well, I didn't really want it that much anyway. And so, to me, it's always about defining what the intent is. What do I really want to do? Because if I have that down, that helps keep me motivated, because when it gets tough, it's like, hey, I really want this thing to happen. And so therefore I'm willing to put in the work.
Yeah. Yeah. So the lesson there is, if you want to make a persistent browser-based game, you have to be persistent. It's right
You
there
have
in
to
the
be
name.
persistent. Yeah, yeah. And probably browser based. And hopefully it's a game, hopefully it's fun.
Yeah.
So I think that's true in anything in life, right? I mean, there's
Yeah.
very few things worth doing, maybe zero, that take no effort, right? Because if it's easy to do, then you wouldn't get the satisfaction out of it. So to
That's true.
me, it's like, if something's worth doing, that means it requires effort. And so are you willing to put in the effort? And if you're not, then once again, there's lots of things to do in the world. You don't have to do this one thing that got your attention one day for some reason.
Yeah. Yeah, if that wasn't the case, we should all become heroin addicts. So,
Yes,
but we
yes,
all know
yes.
that's not the right way.
Yeah, that's not generally the happy path.
Right.
Is
Ironically,
Yes.
the happy drug does not make you happy. The pain drug makes you happy.
Yes, yes.
So what's the? I don't know if you've decided on the name. Is it House of Chaos? Tell us about the game and what you're calling it, and kind of the story behind it. I do want to preface this with, despite the fact that you're new to coding, you're not new at all to games. This is
No.
the foundation of this game is very, very well developed and long lived. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so yeah, I'm calling it Chaos Empire. My studio, which is a fancy name for, one guy sitting in his office, it's called House Chaos Games. And
Ah,
so, I've been making games since seventh grade, before I knew formal games existed. I mean, I knew Go and chess and things existed, but not formal war games and such. And I just started making games, and I've made games ever since. And so, when I originally made this game, it was called Empire. Um, and I just had this idea. I'd always wanted to run kind of a strategic space-based 4X game, which, for those
huh.
of you who aren't familiar with 4X, explore, like expand, exploit, exterminate, right? Like the last
Yeah.
person standing. and I'd always wanted to do one, and it was one of those I just got one of those crazy things like I'm going to just do this and I'm going to code it, and write the rules. So I wrote the rules probably in 30 days, and started the game. I decided to use Microsoft Access database to
Wow.
write in. Um, I'm not saying I'm smart, but I'm like, well, I know I need a database, and it's mostly a database game, really,
It
right?
works.
And so I'll
Yeah.
do access. And I started the game as I started to learn to code, in that, because it's like, well, they're starting with one system. I can kind of fake my way through it. So I had a closed Nebula, which is just a game instance, and I just said, hey, who wants to play? And when I got to 9, I cut it off. So I had 9 players. I'm like, okay, I can fake my way while I write code in the background. And that's literally how the game, like, they didn't enter
Wow.
the game, from a browser or something. They just sent me a form, and then I had to do the entry. So, but in the meantime, I was frantically coding. But the game went for 5 years.
Wow.
And it was a lot of fun. Now I didn't get to play, of course, because I was running it. Um, but ever since then, it's like I want to do this so that first of all I can play, and second of all the validation players can enter everything online, does all the validation, so I don't have to touch it. We all know how that works in theory. Uh, but so I've been waiting to do it since. So now I'm working on it, and hopefully before I die of old age or something, I'll get it out into the world.
Yeah, yeah, I hope you do, because you like it's a unique thing that you have so much experience with game design and world building and stuff, and you just need it to manifest digitally. That's not most people. They have like an idea and they're like, okay, this idea hopefully will be a fun game, but you already have a fun game and you just need it to have a digital body. So
Yeah,
how's
and,
it
and I
going?
think people, and I think people get fascinated with different aspects of game design, right? Like some people like thinking about a cool game, but then it comes into that thing: are you willing to put in the work again, right? Because it's like I have this cool idea. I see this all the time, not only in the PBG group, and not as much on that actually. In some of like I'm in a war game group and things, and people come in. I've got this game, and it's going to be World War II, and there's going to be some Germans, or whatever. And you're like, okay, but like that's not a game, and then like, yeah, I'm not really good with the rest of it. Like, all right, well, that's
Write a
that's
book.
a tough thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's definitely been a huge learning curve for me, and I hope that I can always have you to help with that world building stuff and the game design mechanic balancing stuff, because you've been very helpful so far. So
Nice, I appreciate it. Yeah, and I think one of the things we've talked about, and I do talk about this a lot in these different groups of you want your player to have an experience, right? Sort of like with anything, whether you're writing, creating a game, whatever. Like you want the user, the gamer, the player, whatever, to walk away with a specific experience. And what is that experience? And what's the theme of your game? Because when you're making design decisions, do you go left or right? Well, what's the theme? What are you driving towards? What's the player experience you want? And I see this a lot. Even like I've seen some games that have tons of cool mechanics in them, but they don't work together, right? There's not a central theme. It's not a spine of the game, if you will, of A to Z. And you're like, these mechanics don't really go together. And the designer will go, yeah, but they're really cool. Yeah, I agree. They're all really cool, but they're not supporting the game. So once again, this is the way I navigate things. It's the way I navigate all things, not just games. Of what's my intent? What am I driving towards? And then everything drives towards that. And so it makes a more holistic experience to me of like everything's driving you in the direction you want to go. Because especially I think in this day and age where anyone can put out a game, see Exhibit A. Um, you know, there's a million mediocre games out there, and do you really want a mediocre game experience? No, none of us want a mediocre game experience. So let's try to make a really good experience, even if it's for a narrower market. Let's pick a market and make a really great experience for that. And especially for an indie game, we're not spending $500 million to make a game. Um, we don't need millions of players to enjoy the game. And depending on whether your goal is a commercial experience, a commercial project, i.e., I'd like to make some money on this to, quit my day job or supplement my lifestyle versus this is an artistic endeavor or a learning endeavor, and it'd be nice if people play it because we don't want to put out art, for example, if no one's going to enjoy it necessarily. But that kind of clarity is helpful as well.
Yeah, yeah, definitely very helpful. I was watching a GDC talk of the head designer of Magic the Gathering, and he said that he took some classes about acting. And one of the big things in acting or writing, screenwriting, one of the big things is don't ever let a scene sacrifice the movie, Like don't prioritize, even if the scene is the most amazing scene in the world, if it doesn't, contribute to the overall movie, then it's not supposed to be there.
Yeah,
Kind
and there's a
of.
famous writing phrase called "kill your darlings," which
Yeah.
is you may have written the coolest prose ever, right? Like it just sings poetry and it sounds amazing, but it doesn't support the story, and you don't want to get rid of it because it's like this is the best prose I've ever written. Well, it doesn't fit here, and so I do think that is, what is your intent of writing this story? Like if you want to write poetry in story form and don't care if it's a coherent story, then you're meeting your objective. And I'm a big person about not telling people what their objectives should be, right? Like you should decide what's important. But if you're trying to write a cohesive story, does everything fit within that element? And even understanding the genre, and I think this applies to us as game designers as well. We have a certain amount of suspension of disbelief points, I call them, right? And that we can do things that don't necessarily make sense, but they make the game cooler or the story cooler. But we have to spend those wisely. And to use if you're making a hard sci-fi game and you bend physics in a really, you know, horrible way, you don't have much suspension of disbelief points on a hard physics, hard science game. Where if you're doing a softer sci-fi game and you're kind of like, oh yeah, we suddenly have teleportation. It doesn't matter how it works, it just works. I'm always cognizant of that as well in a game of that. Why do some people like sci-fi games versus fantasy games? Oh, I hate fantasy games, but I love sci-fi games. Well, they're kind of the same to me. But we have these wrappers that we like on top of all these mechanics, and in those wrappers we have certain expectations. We have certain things that we expect to be met, we have certain things that we don't want to see. And once again, those are one of those things to be aware of. You can bend genres a little bit, but you got to know where you can bend them, and you got to use it wisely. And it's like all the rules, you can break any rule, but I think it's a big deal to know what they are, right? Basically never drive a rule over a cliff. If it supports the story better, you can break a rule. But if you're just breaking a rule because it's the rule, hey, this is cool and I'm going to do it, and I see that a lot in writing. Like you did this thing and it's really cool in a way, but it breaks immersion in the story so much and it just takes you so much out of the world that I don't think it paid its way, and you would have been better just leaving it out.
Yeah. Yeah. Luckily I haven't even gotten that far yet, but but yeah, I can see how that would happen. Yeah. So where are you at right now? What's your day-to-day like in developing the game?
Yeah, so I do a lot of time blocking. So Sunday night I set my goals for the week. And I do like weekly goals because if you set a daily goal like, hey, Monday I'm going to do X number of hours or whatever, that's harder to get behind, and then that can be discouraging, right? Like, hey, I planned on doing 4 hours of work on Monday and life blew up and I got 2 hours done and now I'm a piece of junk and I'm not good. So that's my Sunday night is like, okay, what are my goals for the week? What are my two, and for instance, this starting in the beginning of this month, I had two main drives, and it's writing. I'm writing my first novel, so I've written short stories. I do a lot of editing and help people with world building and stuff, but I'm writing my first novel, so that's one of my goals. And coding Chaos Empire is one of my goals, so I set minimum time on it. So for instance, right now that's 5 hours of writing, 5 hours of coding, minimum. And I do start a timer when I start, so I do a time block, and I can't do anything else till I stop the timer, um, and then that's it. I've got my plan of here's the things I'm going to work on, and I try to put that into really hard categories that are going to just take a big block of time because I have no idea what I'm doing and I'm going to have to really struggle my way through it. Versus hey, here's some easier tasks, here's some things I've kind of figured out, and they'll be the classic debugging, and but it'll be a much more I hate to say relaxed because it's probably not relaxed, but easier, less frustrating. And then so sometimes it'll be like, man, I just don't have the bandwidth to really tackle this hard thing because I'm not sure where I'm going, but I
Yeah.
want to keep driving forward on the project because every hour I do that's a productive hour is an hour closer to the result I want. So that's it. I'll decide, hey, I'm gonna come in there and just pick some low hanging fruit, basically. In fact, today I plan on tackling the next step up in my process that's much harder because I've got the time. And so if I really struggle with it, I feel like I got the hours to do, and then I've got the rest of the week to maybe kind of hammer through it. And right now I'm trying to kind of connect up a vertical piece of the game of, hey, I'm putting in orders, then I'm processing the orders, then I'm advancing, so once I get that vertical piece connected up, I can start to expand that out into other, aspects of the game. But
Nice. Yeah. So would you say that it's going well? You're happy with how it's going?
I'm really happy. Honestly, I think I've kind of hit the point as a coder myself where I'm really understanding what's important and what's not. Like learning to debug has been huge. Like instead of
Yeah.
just seeing this huge message and going, oh my God, this is lots of stuff, and then flailing around on the code, like trying to fix things, of taking the time to really look at the message. I've also, my tendency is, let's say I'm going to write a method or whatever, and it's got 6 things in it. What I used to do is write all 6 things and then hit the go button. And then when it didn't work, it'd be like, okay, it's not working somewhere. And now I'm trying to debug the wrong thing. Now I've learned of let's get one piece working, even with maybe a generic, like, hey, this is just going to say hello world sort of thing. Okay, now that's working. Now connect it to what I want. Now it's putting the output I want. Now add the next output. So I really think, to me, coding is fascinating. I don't know the language very well, and I'm very frustrated because you'll look at the docs and the docs will take you to level 1, and I need to be at least level 2 or 3, and you just can't find that. So you find it by going out on the internet. So I think I've kind of hit critical mass as far as that goes. And I think honestly, like ChatGPT has hit critical mass of being very helpful and me learning how to navigate that and and
Mm.
and knowing enough. Yesterday I was doing something and I said, no, that's not what we want. And it argued with me, which is cool. I've asked it to argue with me, and we were going back and forth. It's like, no, you need to do this. I'm like, no, I'm pretty sure we need to do this, and here's why. But I think knowing how to navigate that when this AI first started coming out, those of you who really know coding were going, oh man, I'm doing all these amazing things with it, and I'm like, I'm not getting much out of it, other than very narrow situations, and so kind of learning to navigate that as well of what kind of questions do you ask? What can you do? In fact, that's the piece this afternoon. You know, I call it internal coding when I'm working within a very narrow universe, right? Like I'm putting some mechanics together that, that's internal coding because it's all controlled by me within a very narrow universe, if you will.
Right.
Part of what I do have to do next, though, is connect these pieces together to a bunch of other pieces. So you're going outside the things you're normally working on. It's like that scares me because now there's a bunch of moving pieces in different locations. So that's where even I think AI is not as good for my or I don't know how to navigate it as well. So that makes me nervous as well because I'm not going to have the support as much of, hey, I'm working within this model and here's what I want and here's the thing, let's argue about it, versus, well, here's the 16 pieces connecting into this, like how do we connect all this together?
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely a double-edged sword. It like you said, for me, it's all about finding what it's good at and staying within that. If I tell it to do something, walk away and come back and it's like a big thing, 99 times out of 100, it's more work for me than if I just did it myself or used it in smaller chunks. So yeah, but it's amazing at like, I made a change, now I need to make this same change in a little different way in 5 different places. I'm using cursor. And I can just hit tab, 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 and it makes all the changes. It will literally save me 5 minutes, right there. So, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's a weird world for sure that we're getting into here.
Yeah, but very exciting. And then once you have
Yeah.
something figured out, so the way I work, like, okay, I've already figured out how, the syntax, if you will, I've already figured out how to write the syntax to make these things happen. So now I'm running into a problem. Okay, I know how the syntax works, so I can pull the syntax over, making minor changes versus trying to figure out what the syntax even is. And then once again, you just iterate. And I think my opinion on coding, once again, as a junior at best, is I think one of the most critical aspects of coding is patience, right? The ability to just beat your head against the wall long enough for the code to do what you want it to do. So just but making that as easy as possible, because there's nothing like when you get in the loop of like I'm going in circles now and I've tried the same things and I've come back around and I'm trying the same things I tried at the start. In fact, I'll comment out what I've tried. It's like I've got this whole long thing of all these different things I've tried with little notes on it. But once you start to solve those problems and understand it, it's like, okay, now I understand what's going on. And Chat GPT is the dual-edged sword on that as well. Like it can make me a little sloppier sometimes of like, hey, here's I just wrote my first test last week and I'd already done the validation for these, and the rules, the game rules, if you can't spend more than 3 and you can't do more than this. So that was pretty easy to drop into Chat GPT and go, okay, write my test. And it did, but okay, now do I really understand that test as well? I mean, and
Yeah.
I went through it line by line, and then I've also learned, once I have something working like that, I do say, okay, now as a senior developer explaining this to a junior developer, go through this line by line and explain to me exactly what it's doing.
Oh, cool. That's
So
really
it
awesome.
goes through and walks through every line. And occasionally I say, I don't really understand what you're talking about, this closure thing. Like, how does that work? So
That's
I'm not going
amazing.
to remember it right away, but you do that enough times, and some of that stuff, you may have to hit me over the head like 16 times, but eventually it starts to stick.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to talk to you about this concept of to transition the conversation a little bit. You have this concept in your book called the brain book. Am I right about that?
Yes.
Um, I haven't finished your book yet because I don't read on Kindle very much, so it's hard for me to remember to go to Kindle. But I do like this concept, and I know it's something I need in my life. And I want to hear you talk about it a little bit, but it's specifically in the context of as a coding project like a PBBG grows. There's so many times where I'll be like, why did I do that? Or I'll even just like go in and make a change, not remembering this big piece and this big goal I had over here. And I just messed up this other part, messed up that for this other part. So can you talk a little bit about the brain book and maybe even how it might help someone doing a big
Yeah.
project like this?
Yeah, well, in the brain book, in the book I wrote, it's called the Entrepreneur Survival Guide. Um, and basically, I've done consulting, coaching formally for over 40 years. And I've run multiple businesses. And this is luckily a concept I got on very early when I was in the Army. For instance, they would come up to you and say, where's all your people? And it'd be like, well, I'm supposed to have 23 and I've got 21. Where's the other two? Well, they're doing something, well, what are they doing? Well, one of them's on medical, I think.
Oh no.
So
Yeah.
basically, I made what I called a brain book, and it's like, here's all my people. Here's where they're at. Here's our mission, if you will. Here's our goals for the year. Here's different resources I may have. So tabbed out. So it was basically my brain in a book. So first of all, the process of writing things down is helpful, right? Even if you don't
Mm,
read it. So
true.
of going in and organizing it and setting it up, but it also was great for things of like, hey, I can flip to this section. And so I took that when I ran my first business. I did the same thing of, hey, what's my who are my sales prospects, and what's my scripts for talking to them, basically your marketing process, right, of engaging them in that marketing funnel from bringing them in the door to turning them into sales. Who's my existing clients, and what kind of business are they doing? Are they doing hardware side? Because I did some computer stuff. Are they doing hardware? Are they doing software? What's my margins on those clients? So it was basically just all this critical information. And I think once again, the process of organizing it, it's like game design, to bring it into the game design world a little bit of like, one of the most important things is asking the right questions. It's not
Mm,
just making things; it's asking the right questions, and that can force you to ask the right questions and get organized. And I think a lot of the pushback I get when coaching people is they're like, I don't have time to get organized. I don't have time to set up processes. I don't have time. And those are excuses, and those can be driven by fear of failure, fear of speaking your goals to the universe, because if you write it down, now you've said it, and if you fail, that in theory hurts more.
mm,
So to me, it's like, hey, let's make this as easy as possible, because anyone who's been in the game business, any length of time, or really anything in life, you know keep that drive going, right? To keep going towards that goal can be difficult. And the more obstacles we set up in the beginning of that, the harder it's going to be to get there. So I'm a big person of taking this, let's turn it into a process as much as possible. And what are the things, particularly things we don't like marketing tends to be a common one. Like, who
Yeah,
likes marketing, right?
I'm
Like,
with
almost nobody likes marketing. I've done it successfully for multiple companies, my own. I don't like it. So okay, we don't like this thing, so what if we could turn it into a process? First of all, if we can outsource it, that's great, right? Either to software package these days, or to a partner, or to a service of some kind. But hey, let's turn this into a process. So rather than saying, I know I should do marketing, and then spending hours thinking about doing marketing and all the things you could do, of, hey, here's my steps, A through Z, and I'm going to do this an hour a week or 2 hours a week or whatever your goal is, and make it as simple as possible. And I talk to marketing, especially to coders. It's like, look, you write code all day long. It doesn't work the first time, right? Like, you iterate through until it works. Marketing is the same thing. You put someone into the marketing funnel and you iterate through till they turn into the clients and they go away, and then you put new people into the marketing funnel. Or hopefully you're always putting people into the marketing funnel. But that's where that brain book, what resources do you have? What gaps do you have? What questions? I start any game design um, with questions first. Literally, I just ask a whole series of questions, and then I go through and answer them. And you will find, like, I released a tabletop role-playing game, I don't know, 3 years ago now, whatever. I'm horrible with time. But I remember when I built, and it's a fantasy, so there's magic and swords and sorcery, whatever. Um, but when I redid the magic system at one point, I sat down and I wrote, what is a spell? Like, what is magic? How does it manifest? Can it be defended against? Like, how? I just wrote all these questions, and I already had it in my mind. So I thought, like, oh, I've got this thing down, but I have a process, and that's part of my process. But it was really funny because I'm writing the answers to these, and I get to like question 7, and I start writing the answer, and I'm like, ugh, it doesn't work with question 4. Like, I already have
Mm.
a dissonance here that doesn't work. Okay, that's something I need to resolve. So before I even started designing the new magic system, which once again I had in my head, like, oh, this is how it's going to work. It's like, okay, I've got some pain points here. I've got to go in and answer these questions first, and that saves me from having to rip things out and rebuild them later, right? We already may have to do that a little bit, but we don't want to do it because we had a fundamental flaw in the structure from day one, that the whole edifice was going to fall over, as soon as the wind blew.
Yeah, and the people who play your game, if they're interested, they're going to be asking these questions. So if you don't ask them first, then they'll probably be the ones to find the problem, and then that's not good.
Yes, players are really good about poking you in the sore spots, and,
Yeah.
and you know, and that's great, because I think, if you love your game. Now, if you're making a game for pure commercial purposes, and I don't really even care, I did something I thought was going to be popular and I blew it out the door and I don't care, then maybe you don't care. But if you're making a labor of love, even if it's for commercial, and I think most of us are making labors of love, you want it to be the best version possible. So I love players who can give constructive feedback. Hey, this sucks. It's not really constructive in any way.
Yeah.
But hey, I don't really like this aspect of the game. I think it should be faster. I think it should be slower. I think it should, be different. Those are the things that let us, and this is where we kind of pull out our intent again. Like, what's my intent? Who's my core target audience? Because you're going to have people who want to make it their game rather than your game. Hey, I have a turn-based game. Hey, this would be cooler if it was a real-time game with, well, no, that's not the game I'm making. So I appreciate that that's the game that you want, and that there would be some cool aspects if we did that. Mine's a simultaneous turn-based game, and I'm not breaking that, right? That's a fundamental foundation of the whole thing. So yeah, any feedback that says it'd be cooler as a real-time game, yeah, okay, that's cool, but not interested in that. But hey, I think the turns would work better if you did this, or you change the processing order. Hey, you're processing these orders before these, and wouldn't it be better if we process this first? Or now all of a sudden you're thinking, like, okay, based on my intent, does this suggestion that I'm getting, does this drive me harder and closer to my intent than the way I have it now? If yes, that's awesome feedback. And if
Yeah.
not, sometimes if you find people are having the same pain point, but there's a reason for it, that's where communication can come in. Hey, the reason we're doing it this way is because, and this is why it works. And there's people who will never be satisfied, and that's fine. But for most people, they'll look at it and go, oh, okay, I can see the trade-off, because the fact is we're always making trade-offs, right? No matter, every decision we make closes other doors. And so it's like, okay, this is the trade-off we've made, and here's why. And then that once people understand that, then they're happy and they feel like, okay, I understand the universe, as it were, and so I can go forward in peace and happiness.
Yeah. Knowing the limitations is key, knowing the rules.
Yes, yes.
Well, awesome. I think we can wrap it up. I definitely want to plug the PBBG community in general and let people know if they're interested in doing a PBBG, there's nothing better than the PBBG Discord. I found it. I fell in love with it. You've been there much longer than me, and you're a big part of the community. And there's a bunch of great devs on there. How have you found it? Do you like it too?
It is. I would have to say honestly, you're not supposed to pick our favorite child, right? But I think it's my favorite Discord community. I've
Yeah.
really gotten so much help there. There's some people who are super knowledgeable coders. They're super knowledgeable. There's people who've run games that have had lots of players, right? So you have experience of people who run in games. Um, and there's just, I won't call out names, because then I'll miss someone important as well. But yeah, there's some people who've really been instrumental in my development, particularly early on, because I just had no idea what I was doing. And I had some people jump on with me and say, hey, don't be a bozo. And they did that much nicer, but like, do this instead of hitting it with a sledgehammer, why don't you just push the on button? So it's great from a technical perspective. It's great from a community perspective. It's great from a motivational perspective because you've got a lot of people going on the same journey you are, and it's hard, but they're going to cheer you on, and then you're also going to get some people who are going to be willing to jump in and test your game or test your ideas. You pop them in the mechanics or the UX UI or front end or back end. There's the different channels, and say, here's what I'm thinking, and you're going to get some great opinions. And once again, not all of them are you're going to necessarily execute, but you're going to have done some be able to get some great thinking out of it.
Yeah, there's a lot of variety too. Like there's some people who are really good at like look and feel. You're really good at world building. There's some people who are really good at just the technical stuff. And so to be able to kind of fill in any gaps in your knowledge is really great. And everyone's so helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes they get into these technical like back end discussions of 16 levels deep of some security issue or
Yeah.
some, and I kind of follow along as best I can. I feel like the slow kid on the bus. Like, okay, I'm not even sure everything you're talking about, but that it is the depth of experience there is incredible. And for me, it's like I'm just going through and trying to, okay, instead of trying to understand all the technical details, which I'm not capable of doing because I just don't have the view box to look at that through. Of, hey, I'm kind of seeing where they're going with this. I'm kind of seeing what they're talking about. I was like, oh, here's some concerns because people can hack into the front end and do this. I'm like, oh, I didn't know you could do that. And so you can not follow those conversations if you don't want to. But for someone like me, you get to kind of look in from the outside and go, okay, here's some really knowledgeable people having a conversation about this, and I can kind of at least learn some of the basics on it so that I can ask some questions down the road. I know, for instance, with my code base, it's like I don't think security. I've tried to do the secure things, but I'm relatively certain that it's not near as secure as it probably needs to be before I launch.
Yeah, and it would definitely be good to post that stuff on there and let people tear it apart. People love being right.
Yeah. I do remember someone came into the community once and said, I've launched my game, and this thing is like no one could touch this, like no one could hack my game, no one." And I'm just thinking, wow, okay, like whatever. And within 5 minutes, a few people had already posted multiple things they'd already hacked into the front end and done
Oh,
things to the
wow.
back. So yeah, I was like, don't throw the gauntlet down, but
Yeah, unless you're really ready. Yeah.
yes. Well, I don't think I'd ever throw a security gauntlet down other than with someone I trusted to go in there
Yeah.
and stress test it or whatever. But to each their own. Whatever brings you joy, I
Yeah,
guess.
why even call attention to it? Yeah. All right, so where can people find your stuff? The Entrepreneur Survivor Guide is on Amazon. I
Correct.
got it on
Yeah.
Kindle. Great book. Definitely recommend it. It's just a solid, overview of really important advice for anyone who's running a business. It's very simple, to the point, hits all the points very, very briefly, but deeply. So highly recommend that. Anything else that people should be
Yeah, I
interested in?
think housechaosgames.com is my
Right.
game site, and that you'll find the link to the book on there if you want to just do it the easy way. I have my tabletop role playing game, which I released,
That's
so
right.
that's available, and that's purchasable through Drive-Through RPG. It's got
Drive through
automated character
RPG.
sheets and combat trackers, so it's got all kinds of fun stuff. And then that's where I, in theory, update people on Chaos Empire as we slowly build it out. And there's a few other things in the works too. Eventually.
So search. They can just search House of Chaos on drivethroughrpg.com, right?
House Chaos Games. Yeah,
House
House
of
Chaos
Camp
Games.
on DriveThruRPG. Yeah. Yeah, I looked it up. It
Yeah.
looks really
And once
cool.
again, or there's a link on the housechaosgames.com
Oh,
website.
right.
So I've been making it simple. So once again, I'm an old infantry guy, so let's not make it complicated
Yeah.
for people.
Yeah. All right. Well, awesome. Thank you for taking the time this morning. We planned this like 30 minutes before we did it. 15
I think
minutes.
30 minutes is even generous, but
Yeah, I think it was like
it's
15
great,
minutes.
and we have chatted before. I always enjoy conversations with you, and once again, it is through that persistent browser based group. It's just a great group of people.
Yeah,
So once again, to mirror your message, I think if you're making a game, even if it's not necessarily fit the full thing, feel free to jump in and check it out.
for sure. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I'll talk to you
Awesome.
later.
Take care. All right.
We can actually